Hey there everyone, I'm Caedo Genesis and welcome to another Caedo's Countdowns. We're dipping back into Fallout New Vegas, not just because I make Fallout content and it's a fun one to go back to, but there are plenty of things that fit nicely into a list. This one will be going over the strongest melee weapons you can find in the game and its expansions, and the criteria being base damage. This is the melee weapons that swing, slash, and smash and usually have handles. Punching and unarmed weapons will get their own list, because of how generous the developers were with such weapons. Because of guides being kind of my thing too, you can expect that I won't just go over the base damage of the weapons, but also where you can find them. So here are the 10 most slashiest, slammiest, crushiest melee thing stuff when it comes to base damage in Fallout New Vegas. Our list starts at the end of the DLCs for New Vegas. That is the Old Glory Flagpole, a two-handed bludgeoning weapon. You should not let its brittle appearance fool you, because the base damage of this thing starts off at 45. And while this is the first on the list, its special move that can be pulled off outside or inside of VATS, called Grand Slam, hits for 200% of the weapon's damage. To do this in VATS, you'll need a melee skill of 50, but to do it outside of VATS, you don't need melee skill really at all. Just hold forward and hold down your attack button. I would also like to mention the AP costs of Old Glory, because its normal attack starts at an extremely low of 22 for a two-handed melee weapon, but goes up to 35 if you're using Grand Slam in VATS. Not much more needs to be said besides where you get Old Glory if you're looking for it yourself. If you complete Lonesome Road, you just automatically get it, but its location differs depending on how you decide to end Lonesome Road. Ulysses is wielding this at the final encounter, Ulysses Temple, and at that point you get to decide whether you fight alongside him or fight and kill him. So killing Ulysses, you'll be able to loot it off of his body afterwards. But if you decide friendship is more important and exercise that speech muscle, in the crate that is left for you outside of the canyon wreckage, you will also find Old Glory. Ninth on this list is a kind reference to the fan-made Fallout web series called Nuka Break. This is the Nuka Breaker, which comes from the Gunrunner's Arsenal expansion. The reference alone to the endearing web series is enough of a reason on its own to get this Nuka-Cola sign, turned neon mallet. But it also has some interesting quirks that no other weapon does. Its base damage is a flat 50. The Nuka Breaker also happens to boast the highest critical chance multiplier for blunt melee weapons by ×2. Well, technically it's beat out by the shovel that has ×3, but I don't see any of us using a shovel for very long. Anyway, thanks to the Nuka Breaker's high critical chance multiplier, it has an improved chance to use its hidden effect, which causes the Nuka Breaker to do bonus electrical damage when its scores are critical. Hard to tell what the bonus damage amount actually is when it crits, but because of that bonus being electrical damage, I would guess that it does improve damage with critical attacks against robots and those in power armor. I don't know if that's all of its critical damage, which is another 50, or it's a separate amount. If any of you find an actual damage value to its crit effect, please share in the comments. This is just a decent, hard-hitting, high critical chance melee weapon. If you're looking to find your nod to Nuka Break, you needn't look far if you've already reached Freeside. So long as they're still living, the Nuka Breaker can be purchased from Mick at Mick and Ralph's for a fairly decent amount of caps, around 7 or 8 grand. As Gunrunner's Arsenal weapons go though, this is actually one of the cheaper ones. Because of its location though too, there are plenty of casinos nearby to get a good chunk of the caps you need. The first of a few rapidly striking weapons on this list is the Ripper, the Gunrunner's Arsenal version specifically, and I'll get into why shortly. The Ripper hits multiple times per second, so the game decides to measure that damage in how much sustained it does for a full second. So its base damage and damage per second are the same number, which is 50. The first thing you should know about the Ripper is that it ignores damage resistance and damage threshold. It looks at armor and says, nah, and proceeds to remove the limbs underneath said armor with frightening efficiency. The Ripper matches the Nuka Breaker in damage of 50 until you decide to modify it, by means of the modification called Ripper Carbide Teeth, provided also by the Gunrunner's Arsenal add-on, which increases its damage by another 10, putting it at 60. The Ripper only has a ×1 critical chance multiplier. On top of its armor ignorance, armor ignoring, armored denial, it checks for criticals multiple times per second because of how it works like a chainsaw. So if you put any putting effort into doing critical hits as well, the Ripper can become the Butcher's best tool. Because this is not a unique weapon, the Gunrunner's Arsenal version of the Ripper can be found in multiple locations from multiple different vendors. You can find it sold by caravans wandering the wastes of the Mojave, sold by Mick, once again at Mick and Ralph's, Cliff Briscoe and Novak, and the Gunrunner's Vendortron. Those and others are likely to have the Ripper Carbide Teeth mod as well. Continuing the trend of going all over the place, our next entry is the Protonic Inversal Axe, a rare purple energy bladed thing to swing from Old World Blues. The Protonic Inversal Axe's base damage is at 58. Straight across, this is just an improved variant of the Proton Axe. So once you find the Inversal Axe, you can throw the old one away. Unless you're collecting them, of course. Because of it being very clearly an energy-oriented weapon, it also has bonus damage versus robots and those in power armor. Nearly double damage to robots. The Inversal Axe is not only better in base damage, but also in critical damage compared to the Proton Axe, where that one only had 25 critical damage, and this one has 45. At melee 50, you can perform the Inversal Scarifier move in VATS, which can also be done outside of VATS at any skill level by holding forward in the attack button, like mentioned with Old Glory. And this Inversal Scarifier move doubles the damage output of the swing. Critical hit, of course, making it even more absurd. But disappointingly, the Protonic Inversal Axe kind of falls short on the critical chance multiplier side of things, just with ×1, so only using your natural or what VATS gives you. Still, this thing is awesome at wiping out robotic enemies, which you will encounter quite a bit when you're traveling through Big Mountain. If you are searching for a Protonic Inversal Axe to use while you're here in Big Mountain and after the fact, it can be randomly wielded by lobotomites. But if you're looking for a location more concrete, there are two surviving prisoners, number 27 and number 34, at Little Yangtze. You can find these two on the hill right above the camp, and usually one or both of them is wielding the Protonic Inversal Axe. Next is a familiar looking bumper sword, but found on the opposite side of the river, the Blade of the West. It has a base damage of 60. So what's the difference between the two? Well, first of all, the Blade of the West can be found in one of New Vegas's DLCs and used well after the fact, whereas Legate Lanius's Blade of the East can only be used for an extremely short time after defeating him. This one deals 5 less base damage and doesn't come with the extra damage over time that Lanius's does. But what is included with this weapon is the Mauler's special attack if you reach the right amount of skill, which does half as much damage in VATS at a higher action point cost, but has a chance of knocking your opponent down. And just like most of the VATS attacks like this one, holding forward and the attack button does the trick too. It's still close to double damage of your standard bumper sword, but because it's also kind of a replica, the Blade of the West comes with the lowest durability out of all 3 variants too. Lanius's blade might be more durable and hit harder, but this one swings faster and has a higher critical chance multiplier of 1.5 times instead of just 1. Considering this, and the knockdown utility that they all have, worth considering for any discerning melee user. Now for where you can find the Blade of the West. There is a sub-faction of extremely angry individuals in the Lonesome Road DLC known as the Marked Men. Once you reach the Divide, some of these marked men will be carrying a Blade of the West, but if you find yourself getting close, near line of sight with Ulysses' temple, there will be a marked man leader by the name of Blade, ready to face off with you. He should also be wielding a Blade of the West, so there's a couple of ways to get one, or multiples to repair the one you have with. Now we go back to Big Mountain, back to Old World Blues, for the X2 Antenna. This is a quest-based unique with a base damage of 65. And that ever so useful, at least here, additional EMP damage to robots in power armor. So like I said, robots in power armor. That would be fun too, robots and power armor. Something I should mention right off, practicality is not really this weapon's strong suit. It appears to have the slowest swing speed out of all of the bludgeoning weapons in Fallout New Vegas, at 1.1 swings per second. Obviously that completely destroys its DPS, but if you have nothing else at hand to deal with robots, the X2 Antenna might still be an improvement. And VATS doesn't really rely on swing speed anyway. There's not much more that needs to be said. 65 base damage is still pretty high. Pain frequency, its VATS ability, will double its damage output in VATS, and can be performed the same way as mentioned in previous entries of two-handed weapons, not requiring a melee skill of 50 at all. Now on to where to find the X2 Antenna, which like I had said at the very beginning of this entry, it's a main quest objective when you're tackling Big Mountain. After your introduction with the think tank in Old World Blues, Dr. Klein will ask you to go to the X2 transmitter antenna array, and this is found at the very top of the satellite dish once you reach it. If this list was based on favorites, this would probably be the number one, and it is Knock Knock, a unique silver-headed fire axe. I'm not saying this axe is actually on fire or made of plasma, it is just a fireman's axe. But its base damage is 66, 11 more than your basic fire axe, and its critical damage is half of normal at 33, but it makes up for these downsides with its exceptionally low AP cost for both its normal and its Mauler attack. Remember, that's the one that has a knockdown chance on top of it. Its Mauler swing only takes 26 AP. If these AP costs are any indicator, its swing speed outside of VATS is also pretty quick, at nearly 2 swings per second. Knock Knock's looks are definitely deceiving, but then again, another entry is just a freaking antenna. What I'm trying to say is, a tool turned weapon isn't always as weak as it appears. I also appreciate this one not taking up a third of my screen, like many of the other melee weapons. Now for where to find Knock Knock, it is certainly off the beaten path, and there is a key that someone holds required to reach it. The axe itself is located in Camp Searchlight, the NCR camp to the south, shrouded in a heavy cloud of radiation. On the west side of town, there is a mostly destroyed church with a hatch that leads to its basement. Go down there and you may meet Logan and his band of merry mercenaries. You can either kill Logan for the key that you need, or take part in the quest Wheel of Fortune, where he and his team will escort you to both the police station and the fire station, unlocking them as you go. How you deal with the mercenaries doesn't matter so much as getting the keys from them. Once you get to the fire station and make it upstairs, find the restrooms and locate the stall that is still clearly occupied by a rather skeletal individual. Tucked back there next to their body will be Knock Knock. If you need extra impact with how you carry yourself in the Mojave, this is your most powerful choice, the Oh Baby, strongest of the two-handed crushing weapons. It is a unique variant of the Super Sledge with a base damage of 80, critical damage of half that, and a critical chance multiplier of ×1. Oh Baby also beats out other competition in the blunt category with its damage per second, because of its unusually fast swing speed for the size of the weapon you're wielding, broken down to 1.74 swings per second. Oh Baby also comes with the now standard at this point Mauler VATS attack, mentioned in previous entries, with the high AP cost for most attacks being pretty much its only downside. It's just wildly powerful and quicker than it appears. Charleston Cave is where you can locate the Oh Baby Super Sledge, and this location is pretty much on the northwestern corner of the Mojave map, just north of Jacobstown. If you take on the quest Guess Who I Saw Today from Jacobstown, you will be led directly to where the Oh Baby is kept, and its location within the Charleston Cave will be marked with a Nightkin's corpse. That corpse won't be there unless the quest is active. These last two are where it gets a little crazy, but taking the number 2 spot is the Gunrunner's Arsenal version of the Chainsaw. If you recall when I was speaking about the Ripper, this one's damage is measured the same way. Its base damage and DPS are identical due to the nature of a spinning blade type weapon, and that number is 80. 80 base damage. It sounds like there is a bug with the chainsaw though, not allowing it to ignore damage threshold and damage resistance, like the Ripper would. But a mild workaround for this and every other melee weapon you have would be getting the Piercing Strike perk, which lets you ignore a certain level of damage threshold. The Gunrunner's Arsenal variant of the chainsaw is recommended obviously because there happens to be a mod that increases its damage further, and that would be the Chainsaw Carbide Teeth, increasing its base damage from 80 to 95. That is a ton of damage coming out of this thing. And I'd like to remind you that crits are checked multiple times per second with a weapon like this. So even if the full damage is not going through your enemy's armor, they will still be taking loads of damage every single second that you're poking them with this motorized skin flare. The chainsaw is also heavy to lug around, matching the weight of the Super Sledge or Oh Baby, but one of its other mods, the Chainsaw Alloy Frame, can decrease its weight by 8, dropping dropping it down to a measly 12 pounds, but it's not required, of course. But I don't recommend it nearly as much as the straight damage increase mod. So on to where to find the Gunrunner's Arsenal chainsaw, which is quite similar in where you would find the Gunrunner's Arsenal Ripper as well. The Gunrunner's Vendortron can sell it, the Arms Merchant at the 188 Trading Post, and Cliff Briscoe at the Dinobite gift shop are a few locations where you can find the GRA chainsaw, as well as a possibility of its mods being available too. Before we get into the absolute strongest melee weapon in Fallout New Vegas, I already made mention of it a little bit, but you'll understand why I made this omission in the first place. The Blade of the East, with a base damage of 65 and a damage per second effect of 2 damage per second over 10 seconds when you hit something with it, topped with its chance to knock enemies down, makes it an incredible weapon wielded by Legate Lanius. If you've reached the end of New Vegas during the second Battle of Hoover Dam, you'll know that this encounter with Legate Lanius is short-lived and moments before the end of the game. So unless you're using console commands or cheat mods or something, you won't actually get to wield this against anything else besides General Oliver and his guards, I think. It's a bummer that we can't use this by other means, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway. Now for the final, most powerful by quite a bit melee weapon in Fallout New Vegas, it is the Thermic Lance. After my first few times through Fallout New Vegas, I had never ever expected this unassuming weapon to be the most devastating out of all of the melee. That is until some faceless legionary decided to poke my courier's forehead with it, morphing his head from the form of a tomato to that of ketchup in less than a second. The Thermic Lance is a rapid hitting weapon, base damage and DPS match at 100. There's no mods for it, as if it needed any in the first place. Because of it being a rapid attacking weapon too, attacking in VATS is not really necessary, but if you are going that route, it has the Scrap Heap special attack, not usable outside of VATS, because holding down attack is part of its normal move. The special Scrap Heap move in VATS deals half as much damage, but also costs 20 less action points. But going from 65 AP to 45 AP is still quite a bit of action points, and it may just be more efficient unless you're getting through somebody's block to use the Thermic Lance normally. This one, unlike the chainsaw, does properly ignore damage resistance and damage threshold, and is likely why it is so insanely powerful. This is just an outstanding zappy stick, and one that I definitely will try to use more often, knowing what I know now. Like many on this list, the Thermic Lance is not a unique weapon, so if you're looking to find one, there are many options here. Legionary Assassins sometimes carry them if you've allied too much with the NCR. Blake at the Crimson Caravan can sell them sometimes. The Great Khan Armorers might sell them. The Vendortron at Gunrunners. Knight Torres at the Hidden Valley Bunker. Quartermaster Barden at Hoover Dam. And even from Mick's special stock at Mick and Ralph's. Oh, and Marked Men carry them in the Divide too. You have plenty of options to get yourself a Thermic Lance. Now I want to ask you, did this list turn out how you expected? Is there a melee weapon that you still prefer that wasn't on this list? Please share in the comments. If you found this countdown useful, entertaining, or both, you can do whatever it is you see fit to show that. And one of those options is supporting on Patreon, joining the amazing people on screen in the credits, including Wasteland Legend Sven. Until the next countdown, thank you so very much for watching. I am Caedo Genesis, and may you wander the wasteland like you own it.